All right, today we are diving into one of the most catastrophic periods in modern history. We're going to break down how the First World War and the Russian Revolution weren't just two separate things happening. Nope, they were part of one giant, interconnected domino effect. So let's see how that first domino tipped over.
It's a huge question, right? It almost sounds impossible. How could one event, one act of violence, trigger a war that spanned the entire globe? Well, that gunshot was really just the spark. The world was already a tinderbox, just waiting for a match. To really get it, we have to go back and look at what set up the whole thing in the first place.
So before 1914, you have to picture the world as this massive chessboard, covered with huge, competing empires. The great powers in Europe weren't just neighbors. They were fierce rivals in this global game for power, for resources, and, for bragging rights. This imperial competition, it set the stage for everything that was about to happen.
And at the very heart of this rivalry, it was all about colonialism. The thinking was pretty simple and pretty brutal. If you have more territory, you get more raw materials, you get more markets to sell your stuff, and you get more power on the world stage. This system was the engine driving the whole global economy, and, as we're about to see, it put everyone on a collision course.
So you've got this frantic scramble for control. Britain and France, they had a huge head start, right? They controlled massive chunks of Asia and Africa. But then you have Germany, newly unified, super industrialized, and they are desperate to catch up. And this created this deep-seated economic and political jealousy that just poisoned the relationships between all these major powers.
Okay, so with this backdrop of intense colonial rivalry, the stage was pretty much set. It really wouldn't take much to push this whole fragile system right over the edge. And there were several other dominoes already lined up, just waiting for that first one to fall.
And here they are. You've got to think of these 6 things as the real core of the problem. That economic competition we talked about, it spilled over into a massive arms race. That's militarism. At the same time, nations were making all these secret alliances, creating this crazy tripwire system where a fight between 2 countries could drag everybody else in. And on top of all that, you have this toxic, aggressive nationalism, which was fanned by newspapers that basically told everyone their neighbors were the enemy. The whole continent was a powder keg.
And this quote, wow, it really captures that final and maybe the most dangerous piece of the puzzle. The whole philosophy, the way people thought about war, had shifted. Influential thinkers started to talk about war not as this horrible tragedy, but as a noble, cleansing, even a sacred act that a nation needed to achieve greatness. This kind of thinking made war not just possible, but for some people, it actually made it seem desirable.
And then, the spark. The assassination of the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. Now, in a different world, maybe this could have just been a local crisis. But in the world of 1914, with all those tripwires, it set everything off. Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. Boom. Russia, who's allied with Serbia, starts mobilizing its army. So Germany, allied with Austria-Hungary, declares war on Russia and France. And just like that, the dominoes fell, one right after another.
The war that came next, well, it was unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. It was a truly global conflict fought with terrifying new industrial weapons. The cost, both in human lives and to society, was just staggering.
10 million people killed. Just try to wrap your head around that number. It's almost impossible. And that's not even counting the nearly 20 million who were injured, or the millions of civilians who died from disease and starvation. The cost of the war was immense. The world was just shattered.
But the impact went way beyond the battlefield. Think about it. With millions of men away fighting, who was going to run the factories, the offices? Women. They poured into the workforce, taking on jobs that they'd always been shut out of before. And this was a massive social shift. It proved what they were capable of, it boosted their confidence, and it fueled powerful new demands for equal rights.
So as this brutal war finally grinds to a close, its chaos gives birth to 2 absolutely world-changing events: a violent revolution that brought down a 300-year-old dynasty, and a peace treaty that would, by accident, plant the seeds for an even deadlier war.
Over in Russia, the war was the last straw. The Tsar's government, this absolute monarchy that had ruled for centuries, it was already on shaky ground, something we saw way back in 1905 with the Bloody Sunday Massacre. The unbelievable suffering and the military defeats of World War I just led to mass strikes, and finally, the Tsar had to give up his throne. And into that power vacuum, in stepped the Bolsheviks. They seized control, pulled Russia out of the war, and created the world's first communist state, an event that would shape the rest of the 20th century.
Meanwhile, the winners get together in Paris to figure out the peace. But the Treaty of Versailles, this wasn't about healing. Oh no, this was about punishment. Germany was forced to take all the blame, pay these crippling reparations, tear down its military, and give up huge chunks of territory. You can imagine, this created so much bitterness and economic despair among the German people, a feeling of humiliation that would have devastating consequences down the line.
So in the middle of all this wreckage and bitterness, there was this one little glimmer of hope, an attempt to build a new world order, one that was designed to stop a catastrophe like this from ever happening again.
And that hope was the League of Nations. I mean, look at these goals. They're noble, right? To ensure peace, work together, solve problems with words, not with warfare. It was the world's first real shot at collective security. But, and this is a big but, it had some major flaws right from the start. It didn't have its own army to enforce its rules, and some of the world's biggest powers, like the United States, never even joined. It was basically crippled from day one.
And that leaves us right here with this final haunting question. They called it the war to end all wars. But by creating the humiliation of Versailles and a toothless League of Nations, did it actually achieve peace? Or did that final domino, that bitter peace treaty, just set up the first domino for an even more destructive conflict? Something to think about.